Before I formally get started, I would like to make note that item number 7, the Fusaklis, has withdrawn. And so if you want to exit, they can submit as many times as they so choose, I believe. But as to not disrupt the meeting once we get going, I was going to get the opportunity to exit. Now, if you so choose, you don't have to go. You're welcome to watch the proceedings. I was not given one. I'm sorry.
Because Carlos is back in town.
Welcome to the October 8th meeting of the Mobile City Planning Commission. I would like to take a moment to review our general operating procedures. Our meeting is divided into 2 sessions, the public hearing session and the deliberation session. In the public hearing session, an application or group application on the agenda is called. The applicant makes his or her presentation. Commission members ask questions, if any. Members of the public make their comments. Only 4 people may speak for an agenda item and 4 against. Each speaker is limited to 5 minutes, subject to questions by the commission. After 4 minutes, a loud beep will indicate 1 minute left to speak, and at this point, please summarize your comments. After all opposition, speakers have finished, the applicant will be given time to respond. If you do intend to speak, please come to the podium, speak into the microphone, and give your name and address for our minutes. Please direct all comments to the commission only and not to the applicant or the audience, and please remember to speak directly into the microphone. On routine applications, the applicant may simply raise his or her hand if there are no objections to the staff recommendations. I will then announce that the applicant is in full agreement with those recommendations. If there are any questions, the applicant will be given an opportunity to respond. After hearing all applications, commission will go into deliberation session. The commissioners discuss each application with input from the staff as necessary, but with no input from the audience. The commissioners then vote on each application, and results of voting can be learned from the planning department. If some issue arises in the deliberation session that were not addressed in the public hearing, the chairman has the discretion either to allow additional comments pertaining to those issues in order to resolve them, or call for the application to be held over for discussion at a future meeting. Occasionally, 1 or more commission members recuse themselves from discussing and voting on a given application. A recusal does not necessarily mean the number is directly involved with the application or the applicant. Depending upon the circumstances, ethical rules may require a recusal when there is only the slightest appearance of a conflict of interest. If a regular member recuses, a supernumerary will vote in their stead unless both supernumeraries are already voting due to absences. The Planning Commission makes final decisions subject to appeal on subdivisions, planning approvals, planned unit developments, PUDs. The Planning Commission only makes recommendations on zoning application, with the city also making the final decision. Please turn off or silence all cell phones at this time. Commissioners and staff, please remember to turn on your microphones when speaking. Roll call. Myself here, Ms. Libby Latham.
Here.
Ms. Shirley Sessions.
Here.
Mr. Alan Cameron.
Here.
Mr. Matt Anderson.
Here.
Mr. Nick Umber.
Here.
Ms. Bess Rich.
Here.
We have a quorum. We'll start with our new subdivision applications. Item number 1, 3709 and 3713, the Cedar subdivision. Recommended for tentative approval. Is the applicant present? Are you in agreement with staff recommendations? Applicant is present and in agreement with staff recommendations. Is there anyone else here to speak for this? Anyone here to speak against? Thank you. Item number 2, Robinson subdivision, 5570 and 5580 Gun Road, recommended for tentative approval. Applicant is present and in agreement with staff recommendations. Is there anyone else here to speak for this? Anyone here to speak against? Thank you. Item number 3, Smith Place subdivision, re-subdivision of lots 1 and 6, 6853 and 6859 Old Pascagoula Road. Applicant is present and in agreement with staff recommendations. Is there anyone else here to speak for this? Anyone here to speak against? Thank you. Item number 4, River Duchesne subdivision, re-subdivision of the Dias addition, 3401 and 3423, recommended for tentative approval. Is the applicant present? Are you in agreement with staff recommendations? Yes. Applicant is present and in agreement. Is there anyone here to speak, else here to speak for this? Anyone here to speak against? Thank you. Item number 5, 6405 Maurice Perot Road, recommended denial. Is the applicant present?
Yes. Brett with Poly Surveying, here on behalf of Mr. George Peru. This application before you is a 3-lot family division. It currently consists of 2 lots. We're simply modifying what used to be Lot 1 and now adding 2 larger lots to the rear. This application was before the Planning Commission some number of years ago, in which the note that staff points out was placed on there. We did not agree with that, yet at the time, you know, that's the way it was approved. This is a county. There's a flag lot that his daughter has on the south side that's noted there is not included. The piece just north there that also states not included is his other daughter. What I had him do is we re-subdivided this lot, and his intent is to give lots 2 and 3, which are these 2 larger lots, to his kids. The reason I did not have him include the existing lots of daughters is that they also have kids, and so if they ever wanted to permit a house, they could then already have a lot ready to go. It would not require coming back to either this commission or county for re-subdivision. So we have, like I said, submitted this as a 3-lot subdivision. It meets all county requirements. There are flag lots, probably 6 or 7, if you look on page 3 of the staff report, that you can see directly adjacent to this. There are multiple irregular shaped lots. This is all family property down Peru Road, and we asked the commission to consider approval of this day as submitted. And I'm not sure if there's any conditions of approval prepared or what the commission, if you have any questions as to, I was part of that original decision, so if there's any questions as to, you know, that I'll gladly answer. But we're seeking approval today.
Another question. The vacant lot, you know, that's spelled out more than the other one that's not included?
Yes.
Okay. If they come in to build something, is that little strip there going to be their entry point?
Yes, ma'am. That currently is their legal access. So these flag lots are consistent all across Mobile County. And you can see further to the south, see the 3 lots where it says barn there? That's a standalone lot. There's one, you got 2 other residences there. So those accesses are basically just driveways that people use to access larger tracts of land. So the vacant land section you're asking about already has, his daughter lives there currently. It's developed.
Oh, so it's not vacant?
As far as I know, it says vacant. I don't have an aerial. Maybe it is vacant. I'm sorry. I know his daughter owns, you know, she hasn't built there, but that is going to be a future home site for his daughter. So.
Is she going to come down that drive?
Yes.
Because if not, she's just landlocked.
Yeah, she has a 20-foot, 5-foot access. It's a legal recorded lot at this time. Yes.
So when the note was placed on the subdivision originally, it said until further development of McAllister Drive into the piece of property or some other paved road with frontage.
Which
And I understand y'all did not agree with that at that time, but that's what the planning commission decided to do. Have those circumstances changed at all? Has McAllister Drive been extended at all, or any other?
The rear section that was brought up in that meeting, the McAllister Drive, is unopened. It's very common in the county. So you would be asking an individual to build 150 foot of road up to a county road up to what is ultimately going to be 2 residential properties when he already has legal access, or would be through this subdivision, a 25-foot strip to a public road, Maurice Peru Road. So to me, you'd be putting a tough constraint on an individual who's ultimately trying to give this to his kids. That's all he's trying to do.
Chairman,
Yes, sir.
a question for you. Does the McAllister Drive right-of-way where it's stubbed out, how does that line up relative to the split of the lot? Is it offset a little bit, or is it?
You know, I didn't even consider it, honestly. We just did a direct, because of the 25, the amount of frontage available to Maurice Peru Road, I simply took that frontage and split it directly to the back. Let me pull my map out real quick.
Yeah,
Well, I think I can answer that. I did look at the plat before the meeting, and it looks like that Lot 3 would only have 10 feet of frontage, and then Lot 2 would have 40 feet of frontage. So there is an offset for the property line.
He's just trying to equally split it just for a consistent division of this property for his.
Yeah, I guess it would seem if it was equally split amongst that existing right-of-way, that lots 2 and 3, you know, theoretically could have access off of. There'd be enough room to build a driveway at the end of that.
Yeah, but I guess my point being is that to build 150 foot of public road or a driveway just to get to the property doesn't make a lot of sense when he's already got a driveway. There's already some driveway and access points to Maurice Peru Road, and that's ultimately where they would plan to access this. I mean, for that matter, if you wanted, I don't even see an issue with, he doesn't need access to that road. I mean, if you want to deny access to it, for that matter, it's just not, it's unopened, and there's no plan to utilize it.
I wouldn't have seen the reason for constructing the road. I'm saying if it's centered up on that right-of-way, it would seem like they would both have immediate access to it, where they could have a driveway come into the property. I just wasn't curious. Was curious about how the geometry worked out, but I see it now.
McAdams. How do you pronounce it?
McAllister.
McAdams.
Oh, no, that other one is.
Yeah, 2 different names on it. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was trying to figure out where you reached. But that's the same one we're talking about. And that's a subdivision already. So you'd be making a cut through.
Yeah, there's no intent to develop it.
No, I'm just
You know,
saying
this
they
is
could have
all
a driveway
family
straight
farm
into the
land.
property. They have access is the point that I was trying to raise. It's just not about the center line of that existing right-of-way. That's the only thing that's a little bit different.
Any,
Mr. Hoffman, I know 2010 was a while ago, but do you have any recollection of the conversation that happened at that meeting and why the planning commission placed that restriction on the subdivision?
Well, since the property is so large, there is the possibility that it could be divided up into multiple lots. And typically, with flag lots, we like to have that restriction on there, because if they don't have additional frontage, then you could have a lot of lots coming off of a, 25-foot flagpole. However, we have prepared conditions which we can provide to the commission and to Mr. Orell if you would like to see.
Well, of course, I'm concerned if we throw out the subdivision restriction that we placed on it 10 years ago, that it doesn't carry as much weight if we were to do the same thing in some way for future. Do you understand where I'm going with that?
Well, of the conditions that we have prepared, we are suggesting again that proposed lots 2 and 3 have that no future subdivision condition on them. So,
The question for you, if it's subdivided as proposed here, there would not be adequate frontage to come in and do another subdivision, would there not? I mean, this is kind of, would be all that they could do.
yes, because I think the minimum frontage that the county has is 25 feet,
Yeah, okay,
and so they would be maxed out.
Yeah, even by
right.
what you're saying, instead of splitting the right-of-way, we've kind of done that to ourselves by not having that 25-foot on that back right-of-way. That lot can't be subdivided
That's correct.
at that location. The only way it could be in the future would be if there was some new configuration of the frontage out at Maurice.
Yeah.
So really, we're kind of doing it to ourselves.
Yeah, if all the
There's
lots
no-
were brought back together into one, then you
Right,
could,
that
but you just
would be
don't
the
have
only
any
way, and
frontage.
it's-
Right.
There's no intent here to do that.
Okay.
Any other questions by commissioners?
Did you include as one of your recommendations, saying that McAllister could not become an opening?
Ms. York is handing out the conditions. We did say that lots 2 and 3 would be limited to one curb cut east McAllister once it is improved and extended to the site and subject to sufficient right-of-way frontage. So,
So you're saying that if that was to get into a subdivided again, then that applicant, whoever it was, could technically say, well, I have a right to come through McAllister, unless
Yes.
we cut that off now,
Right.
under the virtue of it's not needed, it's not wanted, it's not projected.
well, I did look at the 2010 approval, and it did also allow access to McAllister if the right-of-way was improved, but not until that time.
And that right away is not, there aren't homes on that subdivision it looks like there are.
It
So-
is, but the
is
stub out
developed.
itself is not developed.
It's not
The
mine.
developer didn't build the stub out up to my client's property. It stops and just continues
Right,
straight.
because they don't want more traffic coming
Yeah,
through.
it stops a little short.
I will say I am in agreement with the recommendations. If the commission was to choose to deny this for any reason, rather than, this is in the county, with the new jurisdiction being removed, it would look more negatively on my client should you deny it rather than us withdraw it. So if you come to a conclusion that you're going to deny it, I would ask that it just be withdrawn so that we have an opportunity to go back to the county in January to proceed.
Oh, and not have to wait, yeah, for 6 months. I see.
Ms. Rich, there is no waiting period for subdivision
Oh,
applications.
so he could come back whenever, okay.
I hate to put him on the spot, but I see the representative for the county engineering. Any comments that y'all might have about this subdivision?
I think we should cut that off, and that way he does what he wants us to do without making it cut.
Based on the fact that it's a family division, we're generally try to look on these things pretty favorably. They're splitting, they're splitting the access there. That would be normal for what we would allow.
Okay.
In fact, we would allow it by meets and bounds deed without the plat.
Okay. All right, thank you.
I have a question, sir. Thank you. The subdivision, I'm not familiar with it, but McAllister comes off of, it seems like it's pretty developed. Do you think cutting off or future, any way to get in and out of that subdivision to get, should this ever be subdivided again? Would that be proved? I don't know what you hear from residents and how the county feels about that.
We haven't heard anything from the residents on this particular application. Generally, we wouldn't cut off the access
Okay.
to that road. It's stubbed out for a reason, for connectivity purposes, and unless some particular outcry or particular reason, we wouldn't deny access.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions by commissioners? Thank you. New group applications. 2503, 2505, and 2507 Old Shell Road. Clark's Old Shell subdivision, recommended for approval for subdivision and zoning. Is the applicant present?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. I'm Jay Watkins with Maynard Cooper and Gale, 11 North Roller Street, Suite 24290, Mobile 36602. Here today on behalf of the applicant. Applicant's familiar with the staff recommendations in the report and is agreeable to all the conditions contained therein. Subsequent to this application being filed, several of the neighbors along Hurlburt Street had reached out to the applicant with some concern about a number of items, and we have met with them and tried to address as many of those concerns as we can. To familiarize yourselves with this application, this is a total of 5 parcels on Old Shell Road near Hurlburt. Originally, about the January of this year, 4 of these parcels came before you in a subdivision application in which the 3 parcels on Old Shell and 1 on Hurlburt were consolidated into a single lot. That single lot remained B2 zoning with access to Old Shell Railroad to Hurlburt. The applicant now has an opportunity to acquire an additional lot on Hurlburt and has an opportunity to develop this as a professional office. It's currently expected to be medical offices. In order to do that, they've come back and would like to now have the subdivision be a 1 lot incorporating all 5 parcels. Would downzone the 3 parcels on Old Shell and the 1 parcel on Hurlburt from B2 down to B1, and is asking to rezone the residential lot on Hurlburt that's being incorporated from R1 up to B1. In meeting with the neighbors, there were a number of concerns that they raised, primarily surrounding traffic, parking, and make sure that their residential street, which is a minor street, is not overly impacted by this development. After meeting with the neighbors, the applicant has come back and agreed to widen the curb cut on Old Shell Road to provide for 2 exit lanes and a single ingress lane. And for your purposes, I've left with you on your podium there an amended site plan, which indicates the changes that the applicant is willing to make here, and you can compare that to what's in your packet or what's on the overhead. But this has been done to encourage more traffic coming and going from Old Shell and to discourage traffic on Hurlburt. Additionally, the applicant is willing to make the Hurlburt Street access and curb cut right in, left out only. They have agreed to an 8-foot privacy fence along the residential boundary, together with a 10-foot vegetative buffer. They've agreed to relocate the dumpster off the residential property line over onto the west property line of the site. The residents were concerned about the traffic and this being a cut-through, and there's several streets along between Old Shell and Dolphin that do have traffic calming. Applicant doesn't have any say-so as to whether the city will put those in or not. We have had conversations with Councilman Richardson, whose district this is. He was in favor of doing that and said he would work towards that. The applicant has agreed that if 2 traffic calming devices are put on Hurlburt, that they will bear the cost of one of those in an effort to, again, reduce the cut-through traffic along Hurlburt and encourage folks to use the Old Shell Road access. Yesterday, the neighbors provided a letter to commissioners, which I think y'all have on your podium. I think a number of the issues that they raised we have addressed. We have met with traffic engineering, talked with traffic engineering about the revised ingress egress and believe that they are agreeable to what is being proposed. And so, Mr. Chairman, I think there are only two speakers on behalf of the applicant, so if we could go over a minute or two, I'd appreciate it. So what we would propose is, and by the way, the neighborhood has requested a 2-week holdover to address the issues that they raised in their letter. I believe we have addressed those and are asking the commission to proceed today. Attached to the site plan are some additional conditions. Now, as you know, this is a zoning and subdivision hearing, so this is not site plan specific, and we do not intend this site plan to govern the development of this property. The developer may choose to relocate the building, may choose to rearrange parking, but we're showing it to you and to neighbors as an indication of what the ingress, egress, landscaping would be like. And so what we would subject this to, or ask you to subject this to, would be the additional 5 conditions which are attached, which are an 8-foot opaque privacy fence on the south border residential property line together with the 10-foot wide vegetative buffer, which is above and beyond what's required by the ordinance. A curb cut to Old Shell to have separate right and left turn exit lanes in addition to the entry lane. A curb cut to Hurlburt to only allow for right in, left out from the site. Appropriate signage as to ingress and egress at the 2 curb cuts, and the dumpster to be located on the west boundary line of the site. Again, we can't control where the city puts no parking signs. We can't control where the city puts traffic calming, but we would certainly be supportive of both of those along Hurlburt Street, and as I said, would be willing to contribute to the cost of one of those traffic calming devices. Lastly, in their letter to the commissioners, they've raised concerns about the location of a Mobile Gas regulator station that's at the corner of Hurlburt and Old Shell. I've spoken with the fire department about what their concerns are. I've put them in with Mobile Gas and actually had a conference call with them yesterday. I think the fire department would love to have some sort of stamped, sealed letter from Mobile Gas saying whatever they can get Mobile Gas to say. Mobile Gas has said they're not going to issue any kind of letter. They're not going to get involved in this. They are regulated by the Public Service Commission. They inspect their regulator stations quarterly. They have an annual assessment by the Public Service Commission Pipeline Authority. And so there's not a whole lot we can do to force them to do anything that they don't want to do. I mean, they're outside of control. Pursuant to the terms of the Planning Commission staff recommendations and any approval that you would be giving, our development of this property would be subject to compliance with the 2012 International Fire Code. We are certainly willing to comply with whatever the fire department says is required by that ordinance and considering the development of this site. I don't know that this body wants to get into the position of regulating one person's use based on what somebody else next door may consent to do or not consent to do. We can't require Mobile Gas to do anything. They don't have any assets on our property. Their lines don't cross our property. We're not going to impact their lines. They're not going to impact us. We certainly understand that there could be concern that that is a facility that needs attention, needs extra care. It is a regulator station. It does not vent gas. It does not have a release valve of any kind. Takes 60 psi gas from a distribution line, converts it down 30 psi or less to go into residential homes. And they have over 100 of these regulator stations across the footprint in Mobile County. In talking with their general counsel, they've been in place for more than 30 years, have never had an issue with building around them. And so I would ask that the commission go forward with this application as submitted, not hold it over today, but to rule on it and to grant the approval subject to staff recommendations and the additional conditions requested by or agreed to by the applicant.
Thank you. Any questions by commissioners? Ms. Rich?
Did I hear you say that you would work with the city and maybe pay for the commerce?
We talked with Councilman Richardson, and he said he was in favor of those traffic calming devices. He did not commit to us that he would put them in, but he said he would work towards that, and we agreed with him that if he were able to do that, we would pay the cost of one of those traffic tables.
This council is the one that puts them in. They might help fund the mechanism, but it's up to the engineering department. Is the traffic willing to talk about Herbert Street if it's important to get that controlled for the residents to see this development carry forward?
In reference to the traffic calming, yes. We've looked at the map. It's not one of the designated fire lanes, although every lane is a fire lane in the city. It's not on the designated map. And I believe Jennifer may have also talked to Councilman Richardson, and she's actually actively preparing a contract, so now is a great time to get it on the list. So, yes,
Okay.
it is.
So the city's position is not to not do traffic calming. Last I heard, the city was promoting or recommending traffic calming.
We would like to move in a direction to change our traffic calming process and how we're doing things. Whether it's we do it or not, or we don't, there's going to be neighbors that still want their traffic calming. We can't just say we're taking them all out in the city, and that's a totally different conversation.
Right, the ones that are on the ground,
yes.
but new ones, I thought.
Yeah, no, we are still in the mode that if it meets the standards and the studies that we have in place now, that we will still put traffic calming in as it's funded as we have a project put together.
Okay, but staff isn't ready for traffic engineering to make the comments today if it would even accommodate the program.
No, I believe it would. It would.
You feel
yes,
it would?
Yes, ma'am.
Are we allowed to do a rezoning that speaks to a condition of traffic calming? No. So it's, yeah. Okay.
Is there,
And Mr. Watkins' comment this morning asked me some legal issues about this, and what he told me, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jay, was that Councilman Richardson said he considered funding the first one, and that's when his client said, well, if two are requested or needed, they would pay for the second one. But we cannot force the city or the applicant to do that.
Make that a condition of the rezoning.
but if it would make the commission more comfortable, in addition to the requirements or the conditions that we've offered, we would certainly, again, add that condition that if two traffic calming devices are required on Hurlburt and the city agrees to fund one of them, we would certainly make it a condition to our permit and our approval that we fund the second one.
So that does become a condition.
I don't think we can legally do that. That's up to the traffic engineer to make that decision.
Right, that's what I was wondering,
Yeah,
whether that would be a recommendation.
I've never seen it done. I don't think we have the legal basis to do that.
It's too bad, because it's nice when you can come up with solutions to make things more mitigating. So, okay, understand.
We're certainly willing to do that if there's a way to work around that and make that happen.
Okay, thank you.
Jennifer's here. Would you like to add anything? Or, okay.
If we can't make that a part of our conditions, can't he make that with an agreement with the neighborhood that they'll do that? Even if we can't include it in part of our conditions, the applicant could make that agreement with the neighbors if they were just at least on the one they're willing to fund.
The applicant cannot go in itself and put in a calming device on a city street. Right. It has to be with permission of the traffic department. So I don't think that that's within our purview, our legal authority to require that.
Okay.
And yeah, nobody's asked my opinion, but I'm going to give it. If there's any cut through traffic there, it's going to be because of the public, not because of this doctor's office. So why make that burden on the doctor's office? You know?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
You said that this is really, we're looking at the landscape, the layout technically, but the building might shift. The 10,000, is it 10,000 square feet that I'm reading on the map?
That's proposed, yes,
Is
ma'am.
that planning on shifting? The two-story aspect of it? What does B1 allow by right? Do we know? How tall?
B1, I think, has a 45-foot limit. Ms. Crotts or Ms.
So that's
Dork
3
will
stories,
check that.
correct, to go to?
One
By
moment.
right? I think so. I'm not sure.
Ms. Rich, the applicant is indicating that it's, 10,000 is pretty firm. That's kind of all that will service parking there. And so it really can't get much bigger. They may change the shape, it may change the layout, but given the amount of parking that's available there, the square footage dictates that.
Maximum height of 45 feet and 45% site coverage.
Okay, so if it went to, if it, hypothetically, I'm hearing what you're saying, but hypothetically, if it did go up and get more square footage on the footprint, how many parking spaces would be required? Would that automatically not work?
Well, in office use, it's required to provide one parking space for every 300 square feet of gross building area. So the size of the building that they place there is going to be limited by the number of parking spaces they can provide, as well as the required landscape area, which is 12%, as well as any detention that they have to provide on site.
And so if I'm also thinking future out too. So if there are inherent rights about going 3 stories up or 4-story, whatever, 45, I'm not good at computing that, or putting additional square footage in, how many parking spaces would be required today for that type of footprint? Can we do the math, the 300, and by adding another, like in a whole nother store?
With 10,000 square feet in this one, the plan shows 34 required. They're providing 63. If you do a 3-story building, you have to have 102.
So 63 parking spaces would allow a building of 18,900 square feet.
Which could be another story, technically. Just saying. Okay.
So I have one question. If on the traffic calming, I know you can't make the zoning subject to that, but can you put something, attach something that says if traffic says that they'll put one in, you'll put one in, right? But
legally, he could do I guess it's a self-imposed restriction, but it's not a restriction, it's a condition that if the city wants one, then they agree to pay for it. That can be
some sort of memorialization of
exactly.
That.
So that would be an advertised condition because it was voluntary. Would advertise because it doesn't change the use necessarily.
That's
but
correct.
I know when the council gets this recommendation, if indeed it comes up, whatever we do is exactly how it will be advertised, and then any changes that the council would make, you'd have to start again. I think that was pretty clear. So the council is trying to be very cautious about how it comes up, how it reads, and how it will be advertised, so it doesn't change in between as much as possible.
Well, to answer Mr. Cameron's question, our intent is that if the city comes in and says, can put 2 traffic calming devices here, and the city's going to put one in, we will put the other one in. We will pay the cost to put the other one in. And so if that needs to be listed on my exhibit or as my attachment as item number, I don't know what my item numbers are, but we certainly will make that change, right?
6.
And make that an additional condition to the approval and the permitting.
Okay. And the curb cut onto the minor street, if you're doing a double entry up at Old Shell, why would you expect people to come in off of a minor street when chances are the address is read Old Shell, not the street the side street? The residents are concerned about additional traffic. So how important is that curb cut?
Very important for circulation.
Why?
They want the circulation interior, and you see how the parking lot's laid out. They want to give people the opportunity that they're in the back of that lot to be able to turn out onto Hurlburt to go to Old Shell instead of having to come back through the parking lot to the Old Shell Road exit.
But then that would negate your need for having perhaps a traffic calming, any kind of traffic calming, because there would be no impact at all. Because everything would stay on Old Shell, which is really the better street and where most GPSs are going to take those patients or people utilizing the medical service.
Ms. Rich, I agree. I think our position is that there's going to be minimal impact on Hurlburt, but we recognize the neighbors' concerns, and we're, again, willing to do what we can to accommodate their desires and make this something that they're at least happier with.
And just stopping the curb cut further into the neighborhood is a no-go for this application?
We really don't have much, there's not a whole lot of room along Hurlburt Street to move it one way or the other. It's kind of centered up on that parking lot. But yes, ma'am, it's necessary.
Okay, thanks.
And I would say, you know, it's currently part of the existing subdivision that's B2. And so that's been approved. You know, if this doesn't go forward, the applicant could move ahead with its development plan as is and would have unfettered access, ingress and egress to Hurlburt.
Wait, I thought you were changing an R1 to a B1. They could only go as far as it is now. They couldn't go further into the neighborhood. Do I have that right?
We are adding a lot in
an
residential
R1 to the
but
B1.
There was a subdivision approved in January for 1 lot on Hurlburt and 3 lots on Old Shell. And so that access, that ingress egress to Hurlburt is there now.
Right, but what is the zoning on?
B2.
That's already zone B2.
Yes, ma'am. We're down zoning to B1.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions by commissioners?
Thank you.
Anyone here else to speak for this? Anyone here to speak against?
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Chris Diesel. I live at 13 Hurlburt Street. As you know, we residents of Hurlburt Street sent you a letter yesterday requesting this be held over for 2 weeks. Right. We have been in negotiations with the developer regarding this project. Those negotiations aren't complete. We respectfully request it be held over 1 week so we can finalize those negotiations. Right. You've heard a lot about the traffic calming devices and conditions. You've heard a lot about the parcel up there that's Mobile Gas. We want to get those things finalized. As we said in our letter, we think a 2-week holdover would be enough time to address our concerns, plus to get the traffic engineer on board with any proposed recommendations or any proposed conditions. And we also respectfully request further commitment for fire. Right, although you know, I put a picture with the letter we sent yesterday showing that natural gas terminal, and although we got the representations from Mr. Watkins, which I appreciate, that terminal has these signs that make it very clear that it's a very dangerous thing. We respectfully request fire give more than the cursory look that we suspected it gave on this. As I understand, fire only gives comments, substantive comments on development much larger than this one. So we respectfully request that it be held over so we can get a further comment from fire. Furthermore, we also respectfully request a recommendation from the Planning Committee that parking be illegal on the side of Hurlburt Street bordering the property. Waits Cleaners, which is across the street, parking is illegal there, right? We respectfully request parity that parking be illegal alongside the street. And regarding any comments about traffic from city staff, you know, we respectfully request that as you heard from Mr. Watkins, we've been talking about adjustments to the proposed plan, but those aren't finalized. The engineer indicated approval, but we respectfully request concrete borders that emphasize the right, you know, if the agreement is only right in, only left out, concrete borders that require this to the highest level they can possibly be to discourage traffic along our residential street. We're a residential street in Midtown. We're looking for some help, and we think if you gave us a 2-week extension of time, that would really help us out a lot.
Any questions from commissioners?
Mr. Chairman, You mentioned you were looking for more than a cursory look from MFRD. What indication do you have that it was just a cursory look?
As I understand from the Planning Commission, that the Mobile Fire does not give comments on developments of this, substantive comments on developments of this size. Mm-hmm. And it looks very similar to the comment that Fire gave when the property was subdivided from 4 lots to 1 back in January.
The other thing is you mentioned a recommendation from traffic engineering. I think that traffic engineering mentioned that we're actively looking at it. Mary Beth, is that correct?
About the traffic calming, you mean? Yeah, we are actively working on a contract to put that together.
And can anyone from Fire Rescue detail if this was just a cursory look?
As it pertains to public safety, of course, we're involved in everything in the city. I don't know where a state from that said we don't give input for public safety on projects this size. We give input on public safety on everything. The concern with this gas is that it does have above ground piping. I did some research today when it came to light to our office yesterday that there was some public concern over it. So as in light of being about public safety, we decided to do some look. I wouldn't call it a cursory look. However, it's a state regulated industry. It's got state regulatory controls. I did see some restrictions. I did see some boundaries for above ground pipelines, what the pressure systems were, what the diameter pipes were, how far the right-of-ways, the easements had to be from any other structure or other people's property. The equations that they used to factor that were about as long as my arm, and I quit looking at them. So what we had suggested was that either gas company, someone who is familiar with the state regulatory requirements, or a fire protection engineer or a professional engineer that understands that industry, come up with unsealed letters stating that it meets the regulatory requirements for a facility like that. And as was stated earlier, there are many of those stations throughout the city limits of Mobile without incident to date. However, the busier you get around them, the more apt you are to have a car do something he shouldn't do. That can be handled in some cases with bollards and things to help protect. But again, if they're state regulated, therefore we don't have the authority to come in and make them do anything. But because of the public safety concern and because of the issue that was raised, we did some research, and that was our recommendation to help with that. Have someone, PE, come in and do the regulatory research, find out if it meets the requirements, because that has changed some since they put that building there. And if it does, then move forward.
Okay, and
one more comment as well before we get off of this. The fire code states that the authority having jurisdiction, which is the fire chief, has ultimate say on where traffic calming devices are placed. Now, we work well with Mary Beth and traffic engineering where those go. So we would have concern over private negotiations being made through builders and neighborhoods on where they will put traffic devices, because that would negate going through the city structure so that we can communicate and make sure that they're not placed where they shouldn't be. Now, in this instance, as Mary Beth stated, that's not an approved fire department access road that we've got marked out through the city that we need, that we use for rapid access. However, in the future, it may be. And so by bypassing that system, there could be instances where developers and communities would decide, well, we'll put a traffic calming device in unless they have to haptic traffic.
I think that was clear.
Yeah, I would agree with that concern. Really, I would be hesitant to ever bind the city, considering we have traffic professionals and public safety professionals who need to have input on traffic calming devices. The other point you made was about illegal parking. Can the Planning Commission determine if on-street parking is illegal or not?
I don't think we can again, that's up to traffic engineer, is whether or not, I've never seen the planning commission, and I don't think we have the legal authority to, this is developer's property, and that request asks you to do something off-site on city property, and we just don't have that authority. We can request that the traffic engineer put up no parking signs. I think they've done that for Waits, I believe. I know it's been done out there by those apartments in your district, but we cannot require that.
Yeah, that's what I thought. But I think that traffic engineering is pretty receptive to looking at the situation after a development to see if that's needed.
Understood. And respectfully, I submit that that's what we're looking for, a request from the planning commission that they would look at that, right, in any approval. But, you know, there's a lot of moving parts. You just heard public safety say he got a call yesterday to look at this, and they also would have to sign off on any sort of traffic calming device. I respectfully submit that this is yet another reason why a 2-week holdover, because if it sounds like we also need to get public safety on board with any traffic calming device recommended as well. And for these reasons, I respectfully request a 2-week holdover.
If I could comment. Just for clarification, I never got the sense that the developer was going to know where to place the traffic calming. It was funding that the city would have to approve, constructed by, mostly go out by the city of Mobile, and I guess get refunded if that was the case, if there was a second one needed. And again, that's, if we're going to make an impact and know when we hear back from the community, I don't think any of us are trying to tell the traffic engineer what to do, but to be certain that the mitigation is at least validated, and perhaps when you hear from a developer today, well, if there's 2, I'll pay for 1, that sort of gets in the record and gets advertised at least. So there's some, not just something spoken, and of course we would want to say it was trustworthy, but a lot of times things change up and then the next person has to do it, but they didn't think that they had agreed to that. So, and so I don't think it was asking the private side to all of a sudden say where they're gonna, how they're gonna use streets. The streets are very public.
I may have misunderstood that. Some discussion that whether or not legally y'all had the right to require that, and then there was some chatter from the pulpit that we'll just make a gentleman's agreement in reference to that. And that may have been rebutted and came back to what you just said. However, I was just trying to clarify that.
Yeah, I don't think that anybody would have that authority except for our traffic engineering department, just like the placing of no parking.
Commissioner Chairman, if I may, I believe what I heard was that the developer was offering a self-imposed condition to fund an additional traffic calming improvement subject to the city and start approving an additional traffic calming device. And I think the question is can the commission add that as a condition, or is that something that's out of lines for us to add as a condition?
The condition can be that if the city or traffic engineer decides that a traffic calming device is necessary,
right,
the applicant agrees to pay for it.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions by commissioners? Yes, sir.
Thank you very much.
Is there anyone else here against this?
Hi, I'm Alex Hewitt. I'm a resident at 550 Albert Street, and I just agree with everything Chris already said. Obviously, we have a lot of concern with this being our home. And again, I apologize for my clothing. I just had to come from work. So again, I agree with everything Chris already said.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Marin Stiles, and I live at 30 Hurlburt, and I agree with everything he said. We just have concern about the traffic on the street and want as many things put in place to deter the traffic from our residential area. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
My name is Cindy Stein. I live at 30 Hurlburt, and I also agree with everything they said.
All right, thank you, ma'am. Does the applicant wish to respond?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the neighbors who've come out to let y'all know how they feel about this. I would again request that this issue move forward today. I think what they have raised as their concerns about traffic and about access, the applicant has offered, you know, what they're willing to do, and have put that in the form of self-imposed restrictions and conditions on this approval. I don't know that anything is going to change over the course of the next 2 weeks with respect to what the applicant is willing to do here. We feel like that this is a project that is well suited for this site. We are down zoning away from a lot of things that could be there in a B2 use that would have relatively no restrictions on it, given the current subdivision approval that we have and the access that we have. Certainly don't want to appear callous to the neighbors' requests and concerns. I think we've worked very closely, or the applicant has worked closely with them to hear what they've had to say and to try to accommodate those needs. And so I would request that the commission move forward on this today and vote on it and let us know whether we're approved to move forward or not.
I do have a question regarding the items that are on your submittal, Mr. Watkins. It mentions opaque fence. What would the material be?
I'll just Google opaque and see what it is.
Joe Azarisi and Associates, 6170 Omni Park Drive. The opaque fence we're talking about is going to be very similar to what Publix just put in across Old Shell Road. I'm not sure what that material is, but we're going to try to duplicate that.
Is it like a vinyl?
Well, it was
like a vinyl thingy.
It's a Trex manufactured wood product.
Trex is good.
And they put that up on the side of the property, and then they use a standard wooden privacy fence on the remainder of the boundary.
So what abutted the residential? She'll get the higher, better product, and then.
Well, I just wanted them to clarify the product so that we didn't have a question when it came to actual, if approved, construction.
Is it safe to say that it's a synthetic wood product?
I believe so.
I have a question. I just looked at this map, and there is an existing R1 that you're moving back into. Okay. I thought I understood that, but yet you said no.
B2 and R1 and B1.
Right. So that's not a down zoning, that's an up zoning on that lot.
On the one lot, up zoning.
No, I know that part, but I'm talking the R1. Okay. And where is the curb cut? Is that in the R1?
There's an existing lot on Hurlburt.
That had a driveway cut.
That has a
for
driveway
single
and a
family.
B2. No, it serviced the restaurant that was there previously, the Italian Fisherman.
The subdivision approval of the front portion, that's B2, by y'all back in January, the condition was that it had one curb cut to Old Shell and one to Hurlburt, based on the traffic engineer's agreement where they would be placed.
Right, but it was an R1 then, when that was.
Right there. That was a lot that they brought into the Old Shell frontage in January in a one-lot subdivision. That approval gave a curb cut exactly where that dot is, Bert showing.
So the curb cut is in the already B2 zone?
Correct.
Okay. All right. And when there's a one-way in, one-way out, is that with curbing, as was mentioned by the how do you make sure of that? Because just a sign doesn't always work.
No, a sign wouldn't work. It would have to be curbing in between the two lanes and angling the driveway northward towards Old Shell.
The drawing would depict a raised curb.
Okay.
So it may require curbing in the middle, but if the fire department is going to need the clear access through there, the 20-foot clear through there, there wouldn't be anything between the in and the out, but it could be angled as such that the curbing along the street directs them towards Old Shell.
They can't jump it and just decide.
Well, they may, but it's positive encouragement towards Old Shell.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Moving to item number 7. 4662 and 4666 Oak Ridge Road.
No, that was the
That one
one
was
that they
withdrawn.
pulled the plug on.
Yeah, sorry.
Till next time.
That closes public deliberation. We'll now turning back to item number 1 of the new subdivision applications 3709 and 3713.
Did you forget Golden? Is that one we're supposed to do?
That's under other business.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, thank you.
The Cedar subdivision, Walton addition, recommended for tentative approval. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposes? Item passes. Item number 2, Robertson subdivision, 5570 and 5080 Gun Road, recommended for tentative approval. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Item passes. Item number 3, 6853 and 6859 Old Pascagoula Road, Smith Place subdivision, recommended for tentative approval. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Item passes. Item number 4, River Duchesne subdivision, 3401 and 423 River Duchesne Loop South, recommended for tentative approval. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Item passes. Item number 5, 6405 Maurice Perot Road. It's recommended for denial. Is there a motion?
Make a motion to approve, subject to revised conditions.
Second.
I'd like to make an amendment to that motion. I'd like to add a note on the final plat indicating no further subdivision.
Sure.
I think note 1, I believe note 1.
What's that?
I believe note 1 addresses that, placing the note.
Oh,
Future.
I'm
future
sorry, I
subdivision.
didn't realize it was in number 1. Thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Hamburger. I withdraw my amendment.
The motion stands as made. Is there any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Item passes. The application is approved. New group applications. Clark's Old Shell subdivision, 2503, 2505, 2507 Old Shell Road, 5 and 37 Hurlbut Street. Is there a motion?
If I may speak prior to the motion, should the commission decide to approve the rest with the proposed opaque fence, if we could add in to that a statement that the opaque fence would either end at the 25-foot building setback along Hurlburt Street or to end in line with the house to the south of it so that it doesn't block the view. So it's either going to be in line with the facade of the house or the 25-foot setback.
Say that again.
I didn't get that.
The house that is to south, and let me zoom in here, would not want any fence that's being provided as a buffer to cause a view issue, and I'm wondering if having the fence end in line with the house would be more design appropriate versus having it come all the way up to the property line and potentially create a site hazard.
Would the suggestion be that the notes say either, or just, I mean, one or the other, but not?
It could be one or the other. Right. Whichever is, provides the most coverage without causing a visibility issue.
But wouldn't it have to go down to the 3 feet to make?
We typically will do that. However, if you would like the fence to be as high as possible, as far as possible, the suggestion is that it be ended in line with the facade of the house to the south.
And that would be
and that would probably be less.
Can that be designated as 8 feet?
It could be 8 feet up to in line with the facade of the house is what I'm trying to state, so that it would go be higher than 3 feet within the set area that we would typically require.
Okay. Can we talk to the fire department again about the need for more information? Since you said it was a lot of information about the regulator and the concerns that the citizens have raised.
That was, our recommendation was the PE signed the letter.
I'm sorry.
Our recommendation was the professional engineer signed the letter to deal with the safety aspect and concern by the citizens. Again, we don't have regulatory authority over them, and therefore we can't do anything.
But you can't.
However, if there are concerns, to help alleviate that, to let the residents know that system meets the state requirements, which can only be done by research by a professional engineer, and him signing it stating that it does meet it, especially since Spire has apparently, through their speaking with the representative here, that they have decided they're not going to do that. They may want to get an outside agent to do the research and do it themselves to help alleviate the concern. We can't state one way or the other whether they do or not meet the requirement.
And so you're saying that the technician to read that needs to understand what that big booklet or whatever you received about setbacks and guidance on a program that's out there with all those warning signs?
Absolutely. It needs to also get a big thumb drive because it was a large file.
But 2 weeks would be adequate?
That would be up to some of you engineers to discern. I don't know.
You know, I'm going to speak to the group as not a Spire or a gas engineer, but, you know, a utility that's going to be regulated by a public service committee, that right in itself is as long as that public service committee has not come out there and deemed it, flagged it, closed it, or shut it down, somewhat be presumptuous that it is an acceptable facility. I believe I heard the fire department say those things are all over the city and have been there for a number of years without incident, you know, that you might be aware of.
That was the Spire representative's comment. We haven't seen anything on those. Again, the fire department, other than just obvious recognition that they're above ground natural gas pipelines and a regulator station there, other than that obvious concern, we didn't, initially when this came forward, I did mention to someone, I've forgotten who it was, I believe it was part of on the development side, was that because of the parking lot and what they were going to do was whether or not the separation was adequate. We know it's been there. We know that it had a building there before. We know that by the layout of what they've designed here, there's more traffic around it now. They'll have traffic 360 degrees around it now on all four sides. Slow moving through the parking lot, of course. However, the fire department can't regulate it.
Right.
Therefore, we can't require them to do anything. So by public acknowledgement or the residents wanting to alleviate that, I recommend it to the developer, well, you may want to get a PE to look at it and see does meet those requirements. Like you said, it's been a long time.
Right.
And if it does, then that may help them in their acceptance.
That would be, could be done by the next planning commission meeting. It shouldn't take longer, in your opinion.
Well, in my opinion, however, we would have no control over that. I would think someone within 2 weeks should be able to do that.
Yeah, I have to believe that document would not be provided by a utility owner. I mean, if they've got a problem out there, they know they've got a responsibility to correct it and fix it. I just don't think we would ever get that letter out of a utility.
Mr. Watkins represented.
No, he says an independent He's not saying the utility's going to give us this. They've already told them they won't.
And they're not going to allow an independent engineer on their property to make that determination either. I mean, the in-house counsel for Spire has represented Mr. Watkins. They're not going to provide one. I guarantee you they're not going to allow somebody not related to them on their site to inspect it. They're inspected quarterly by the state authorities. Even if a letter was given by an engineer saying, I find an issue with this valve on this pipeline right here, and we denied this application because of that, that's an inverse condemnation. We're not allowing this property owner to develop their property because of something that's going on off-site that we have no control over, they have no control over. They could go up today as B2, they could build a building right now. So we will never get a letter from anybody based on representations made to be by Mr. Watkins. And even if we relied on a letter, we could be sued for inverse condemnation.
But what about residents have come down to tell you that they're concerned about that and
then they need to take that up with PSC. If there is a concern with that station, gas station, whatever, not transfer.
I don't even know, I'll be honest, I don't even know what it is.
Regulator, thank you, Shirley. That's not up to us. It's regulated by a state authority, and the city has no control over it. But it's inspected quarterly. Been there for decades and never had any problem. That's the assumption y'all have to make. That it's safe and in compliance with all regulations.
Do you think that waiting the 2 weeks so that the fire department comes back and tells us all of this from their expertise and their information from somebody that said exactly what you're saying?
We could not deny, I didn't mean to interrupt, I'm sorry. We cannot deny an application because we cannot deny this person the right to develop their property based on something that's going on next door.
But we're not denying, just holding it
could.
up 2 weeks.
What if the fire department came back and said, we're not sure about the safety of this next door? We're going to deny. Well, what are you waiting for that letter for, to make a decision to deny it?
But zoning is public safety. That's why we're able to do zoning and make land use changes. It's
public safety for what's going on this site. Again, it's B2. They could go in and build a restaurant with a drive-through right now, which would probably be a heck of a lot more dangerous than a medical office. But
I don't know, if they came down for building permits and the fire department heard from residents, maybe the same stuff would have to be gathered up.
We cannot force Mobile Gas, Spire, to do anything on their property. That's completely up to PSC.
Chairman, I'd like to make a motion. I move that we approve, subject to staff recommendations with additional comments or additional conditions proposed by the developer, modifying number 1, the 8-foot opaque fence to extend to the face of the adjacent house. And I would also like to add a condition that's a developer self-imposed condition to fund an additional traffic calming improvement subject to the city determining the appropriateness of additional traffic calming improvements along Harbor Road.
Seconded.
Properly moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
Yes, thank you. Number 1 said there would also be a 10-foot wide vegetation buffer. So are we going to put in the oak and that?
Yes, I'd like that to remain in my motion.
Okay.
Well, I also think on the traffic calming, they agreed to put in a second one.
Yeah, then I think fund an additional traffic calming device subject to the city determining the appropriateness and installing the first one.
All in favor?
Aye.
Oppose?
Opposed.
1 opposed, item passes. That closes deliberation. Other business. Review of right-of-way dedication requirements for the following case. It's 1341, 1351 Cody Road North, Golden Subdivision. The staff recommends that the conditions for tentative approval be amended. The items are listed. Are there any other comments from staff?
I just wanted to point out that the planner that prepared the original staff report just referenced the previous right-of-way requirements of the major street plan. When the major street plan was amended in 2017, the right-of-way requirements for both House Ferry and Cody Road were reduced, and therefore the approval that was made by the commission is requiring too much right-of-way. And therefore, we're suggesting that the commission amend their approval to not require excessive right-of-way and reflect the currently adopted major street plan.
Any questions from commissioners?
The only conditions changing are conditions 1 and 2. All of the other conditions would be the same as the previous approval.
Move for approval.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Item passes. Thank you. Any additional questions or comments from staff?
We have no other business, sir.
Meeting adjourned.
Guess you'll never get.
I'm gonna have Fred call. We got a big to do from the.
It'd be like asking Mars, so provide us a letter that says your facility is good or not good. They're never gonna do that. I mean, it's just not, and especially in anything like that, that's not regulated,
Well,
that's regulated by a whole other entity.
we met with Spire because they knew they messed up when they came into town. They made so